last week I began the message, Family Circus, and I told you that there was the three-ring circus, and the family was the three-ring circus, and that there was these three rings all going on at the same time, and they were relationship, responsibility, and recreation, and that your job as a parent, if you're a parent in the room, or a grandparent, is to be the ring master, and somehow keep these three rings all moving and orchestrated simultaneously, and it is not a small task. And so last week we looked at relationship, and we dug into that, and it is absolutely, without a doubt, the foundation of every family. So today we're going to look at responsibility. And we have to have all of these things in balance. You all know this. There's families that have great recreational aspects, but no responsibility. Or great responsibility, lots of discipline and those sort of things, but they don't have good relationship. And we need to have all three of these things. And by the time I'm done today, you're going to realize why responsibility is up there as one of the big three. Now, we all know there's a lot of responsibilities in the family, especially the parents, right? You got to earn a living and pay the tax, and you got to put food on the table, and you have to care for the house and raise the kids, and get your kids here and there. And when you're in the child-raising years, it is just tiring beyond belief. There are so many responsibilities. But there are other responsibilities as well that we need to think about that we sometimes don't. We're going to look more at those and raising the next generation with a sense of responsibility. So I want to look at the big picture here for a moment, because we have a propensity as mankind to shirk responsibility if we can get away with it. So here's the big picture I want to talk about. So in 1982, Canada repatriated its constitution, and we then had the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Most of you know that. We didn't have a charter before that. And for the most part, our Charter of Rights is a good thing. But what happened, it changed society in a lot of ways, because that meant every single law and piece of legislation on the books had to stand up to the scrutiny of the Constitution or the Charter, and it was at the whim of the handful of justices in the Supreme Court that would decide whether it was constitutional or not. And all kinds of laws, like dozens, hundreds actually, have been thrown out as being unconstitutional. Abortion was just one of those many laws. But that's not the fundamental problem. There is a fundamental problem with our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and I'll tell you what it is. There was no corresponding Charter of Responsibilities. And you don't or shouldn't have rights without responsibilities. And what we want is we've now created a nation where people are calling out for their rights, right? And they're always on the steps of the legislative buildings or the steps of the parliament building, and they're demanding this right or they're demanding that right. You never see anybody going to the steps of government demanding their responsibilities. No one's ever saying, we want to pay more taxes. I need to go to jail. I'm a terrible person. Why is nobody demanding their responsibilities? And we have created a culture that is becoming more and more demanding, and we have groups of people that want all the rights, but they don't want the responsibilities. And it was George Bernard Shaw who said this, that liberty means responsibility. That's why men dread it. And I know you probably saw that when it came up on the screen, and you paused for a moment and say, why is it? How does that connected? How does liberty mean responsibility? Let me explain it to you. See, freedom without responsibility is not liberty. Freedom without responsibility is anarchy and lawlessness, and it will create nothing but chaos. But freedom with responsibility actually gives you liberty, because when you are responsible and you care about other people and you care how what you do affects other people, then people trust you and you can do whatever you want. You get freedom. And the same thing works with your kids. That when you give them responsibility, you actually, and they prove that they can handle it, that you give them more and more and more freedom. Am I right about this? Because you now trust them. And it's fascinating to me that when nations birth, the first thing that they want is their rights. So the U.S. was birthed 250 years ago, and the first thing they did was establish a Charter of Rights of their Constitution, which they're still arguing about to this day. Now, contrast that with how God did things. When he was sending them into the Promised Land to establish the nation of Israel, the first thing he gave them was not a Constitution of Rights, but a Constitution of Responsibilities called the Ten Commandments. And he says, this is what I want you to do. When you get there, I want you not to kill people, not to steal from people, honor one another, not to take one another's wife. What kind of world, what kind of nation are they going to have if they would do those things? So what he gave them was responsibilities rather than rights. Jesus comes along in the New Testament. He's delivering a new covenant. What was the first thing Jesus did? He gave us the Sermon on the Mount. Go read the Sermon on the Mount. You know what it is? It's a chart of responsibilities. There's very few rights in the Sermon on the Mount. It's all about how you should treat your fellow man, how you should love your enemy and love your neighbor, and how you should forgive your brother. And it goes on and on and on. And there are these counterintuitive, upside-down principles that he tells you, if you will do these things, you will actually find great success in this world. There are immense promises with it. And so that's why when we look at this, we understand something, that the responsibilities are actually more important than the rights. And that's why God always starts with the rules. I know it seems weird, but that's why. It's like the pastor, he preached one day on the 10 Commandments. This guy came up to him and said, that was a great sermon on the 10 Commandments. He says, I'm going to make a commitment to do one of them every day until I've tried all 10 of them. Right? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the family, keeping all of that, what I just said, in mind. So we're in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 33. This is what it says. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with the promise, that you may do well that it may be well with you, and you may live long on the earth. And you, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and the admonition of the Lord. Now, I'm wondering if you caught that. Those words are all about responsibilities, aren't they? And they're all words about respect. And the man has a responsibility. Did you catch what the husband's responsibility was? What was it? Love his wife. And the wife's responsibility was what? To respect her husband. Aren't you glad, ladies, you don't actually have to love the guy? You just have to respect him. That's a pretty good deal. And then it says the children, they're supposed to obey their parents, right? So there's instruction for the parents. And then there's instruction for the adult children. It says, honor your mother and father. People think that's still referring to the children. It's not. The commandment to honor your mother and father is talking about honoring your elderly mother and father and taking care of them in their old age, that it may go well with you. It's the first command with the promise that you may dwell long on the earth. Did you catch this? That if you honor your parent, it says the reward is you're going to live long. And if you're not honoring your parent, you deserve to die. That's the way I read it. And so and I'm wondering about that one. I don't think we're doing particularly well on that. I think what we're doing is we're sending our elderly parents off to pasture, and people aren't honoring them and caring for them near like they should be. This is part of the responsibility of family. It's like this story of this little 6-year-old. He jumps up on Grandpa's knee and he says, "Grandpa, croak like a frog." And the grandpa says, "Why would I want to croak like a frog?" He says, "Well, because Daddy says when Grandpa croaks, we're all going to Disneyland." You got the point, though, right? All right, so we want to look at these. Here's what Paul does for us, though, as far as parents. You know, we have this idea in Scripture that the Scripture teaches harsh discipline for children. And you've heard people quote this, spare the rod, spoil the child. And you get the idea that, if you're going to raise your kids properly, you're supposed to beat the crap out of them. And Paul is actually correcting that misconception. And he says, fathers, do not provoke your kids to wrath. And see, you can actually stir rebellion in your children by how you raise them. And you probably know that's true. Some of the people that were raised in the strictest homes actually ended up being the most rebellious because they rebelled against all of this discipline in their life because it wasn't done in love and it wasn't done the right way. And Paul says, look, fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath, but raise them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord, or in my version it says the training and the admonition of the Lord. And there's something super important here that I don't want you to miss. There's two Greek words here. I'm going to teach you a little bit of Greek. I always say, I know the little Greek. He owns a restaurant downtown. And thank you. And there's these two words. So here's the two words. I'm calling this taming the wild beast. See, let me ask you a question first. Maybe I should have said this first. See, if you go to the circus and you see the wild animals out there, you got the lions, you got the tigers, you got the elephants. How do they tame them? Does anybody know? They train them. That's how they do it. Now here's the second part of that question. Do they start when they're old or when they're young? Can you train them when they're old? Actually, not very easily. And if you're going to train a wild beast, you have to train it when it's young. The same thing is true with your children. And so tonight we're going to be talking about taming the wild beast. Those are your children. And so let's have a look at this. Here's how you do it. Number one is training. Number two is admonition. That's how Paul told us to do it. He said, don't provoke them to wrath. But through training in the Lord and admonition in the Lord, this is how you do it. And here's what's fascinating about these two Greek words. And the first word of training is the word paideia. Paideia was a word they would have all understood. Now remember, he's writing to the Ephesians. Ephesus was a Greek city. And paideia was actually a Greek word. It wasn't just some little word that means training or teaching. It actually was a type of education. And you can go look this up online if you want, and you will discover that even the word paideia is used in English. It's a type of training that not only educates children, but raises them, are you ready for this? In morality and in ethics, and to be good citizens that that would live for the greater good. And the noblemen and the wealthy and the educated people gave their kids a paideic education. And all of these people in Ephesus, when he used that word, would have known exactly what he was talking about. Paul was from Tarsus, another Greek city. Even though he was Jewish, he was raised in a Greek city. And guess what? He had a paideic education. You can go read about it in the book of Acts. He said he was sent as a young person. He was sent to Jerusalem, where he trained at the feet of Gamaliel. And so, who was the head of the Sanhedrin. And so when Paul comes to us and says, look, fathers, you don't beat the tar out of your kids. You don't provoke them to wrath. You have to train them up. And if you will train them up to be good citizens, people who will be filled with responsibility, then everything will change. Now, let me ask you a question. I think I know the answer. How many of you know who Jordan Peterson is? How many of you know who Jordan Peterson is? Well, not everybody knows. Jordan Peterson is the New York Times. First of all, he was a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. He's an internet sensation. He's probably the number one trending guy on Twitter and on YouTube. He's actually left the university. He does this full time. The New York Times has called him the most influential and polarizing intellectual in the English-speaking world. Now, not everybody likes him. But I'll tell you, he is one of the most bold and candid people you will ever listen to. He's an absolute intellect, so he's way smarter than everybody else, so he can always outsmart people when he's debating. He's very hard to beat in a debate. But the thing that is fascinating about him is he's calling out the insanity of woke culture. And he's calling out the direction that our nation is going and some of the folly of it. And he is doing it he must have some sort of personality disorder, because he doesn't seem to care what people think of him, and he's just launching into it. And here's who his audience is, and this is where I'm going with this. His audience is primarily young people. And the young people are being captivated by it, and they're following him in droves, actually by the millions and millions. And you know what the core message is? I'll tell you the core message of Jordan Peterson is that people need to take responsibility for their lives. That's the whole core message. And he's telling young people this, and they've never heard it before. Nobody's ever told them they had to take responsibility for their actions. And so here's a quote, one of his more famous quotes from the 12 Rules of Life. He said, the meaning of life is not rooted in the pursuit of happiness, but in responsibility and honesty. To stand up straight with your shoulders back is to accept the terrible responsibility of life with eyes wide open. These are bold words for young people. Quit blaming everything on everybody else and start taking responsibility for your life. And he promises them that if they will do that, their life will stop spinning out of control and into chaos and will come into order. And he's heard from literally thousands of young people who are saying that's exactly what is happening. So responsibility, I don't even know if I've ever even preached a message on responsibility. And it's time we started talking about it, particularly in the family. So if we're going to have a paideia education, then here's the basic training. I'm going to give you 3 things, and they're honesty, respect, and gratitude. And the reason I'm going to talk about these 3 things is none of these things are intuitive. None of these things are innate to human nature. Because we are fallen people, we will not be honest, we will not have respect, and we will not have gratitude. It is not something that comes naturally. If you live long enough, you will not automatically develop these things. You have to actually train it into children. And the first one is this. The first one is honesty. Children are not by nature honest. Now, there's a developmental psychologist, also University of Toronto. His name is Kang Yi, and he's been studying children, and particularly their development in the issues of morality. And he's discovered that most children actually lie. And I'm going to show you a little video clip that he did. It was on a TED Talk that he did. And so here's the test they did with these kids. They put them in this room one by one, and they were going to ask them some questions. So they said, we have some cards here, and we're going to ask you to, have you guess some things, and then we're going to check the cards to see if you got the right answers. And if you get the right answer, you win this huge prize. And then they sort of set this up, and they got called out of the room, and they said, oh, I got called out, I'll be right back in a minute, but whatever you do, don't look at the cards. And so then they go out of the room, and then they come back, and then they carry on with this thing, but they videotaped the whole thing. So they knew which kids looked at the cards and which kids didn't look at the cards. But here was the real test. Then they wanted to ask them if they peeked. So the question was, did you peek at the cards? Yes or no? And so I'm going to just show you 2 of the many that they did. And so watch carefully. There's a little boy and a little girl, and we don't know whether they looked or not, but I'm going to ask you whether they are telling the truth or lying. Okay, ready? So roll this clip.
Did you peek? No.
And this is child number 2.
Did you peek? No.
Okay, child number 1, child number 2, side by side. There you saw them. You and I don't know if they peeked or not. And they were asked, they both said no. So how many of you think child number 1 is lying? How many think child number 1 is lying? He looks impatient, he looks like a liar. How many think child number 2 is lying? Well, you picked the right one, it's child number 2. And you know why we don't think it's child number 2? Because she immediately said no, shook her head like this. And that physical action, that reaction, it was just a split second, there was no thinking, and that little rotten kid looks impish, doesn't he? He looks like a liar. He actually told the truth, and there's the other one. And this is what Yi's research has determined. This is going to really surprise you. His research has determined that people cannot tell when someone is lying. And they've done the research over and over, and whether they're laymen or trained professionals, they all get about 50-50. And there is no way to tell if somebody is lying. It's actually where people say, I always know when someone's lying. Actually, you don't. We think we do. But the more important thing is how often kids lie. Now, I'm going to show you one more because I'm going to see if you can get this one. And I want you to tell me at the end of this video if this little girl is telling the truth or lying. Roll the clip.
Do you need to wash your hands? Did you eat cake?
No.
You didn't have any cake? No. What have you been eating? Nothing.
Is she telling the truth or lying? She's totally lying because she has the evidence all over her face. I didn't show you the whole video, but then she holds up her hands, and her hands are covered in chocolate cake, and she said she was going to the bathroom to wash them. The mother says, well, why are your hands all dirty? She says, from the floor. And she just keeps on lying and keeps on lying and keeps on lying. And here's what Yi says, which was fascinating to me. They've measured, and he's discovered that most kids lie. And here's the graph. This is his research. By age 2, 30% of kids will lie if they are trying to cover something up. They've been caught in some transgression or another, and they've been asked whether they did it or did not. 30% will lie. Only 70% will tell the truth. By age 3, that number has gone up to 50% will lie. And by age 4, 80% of all kids will lie. And he points out that it's actually part of human development. As their brain is developing, they realize, are you ready for this? They realize they can get away with something by lying and not have to face the consequences. Why wouldn't you lie? And it's part of normal human development because we have a fallen nature. And morality does not come naturally. So here's the point. If you do not teach them not to lie, they will grow up to be liars. And I know it for a fact. My father had this friend, and this friend, he was, I don't know how else to describe him except to say he was a cheat and a liar. He cheated on everything, he lied on everything, he bragged all the time, and anyone would listen about cheating on his income tax. If he could lie in a deal or a business deal or buying something or selling something, he always lied. Everybody knew he was a liar, and he was a shameless liar. Here was the thing. He didn't try to hide it from his kids. Take a stab at it. What do you think his kids grew up to be? Cheats and liars. Every last one of them. And I can't trust his kids any bit more than I can trust him. And you think to yourself, why would they grow up any different? That's what they were exposed to. So the simple point that I'm making, basic training, is you're going to have to instill honesty into your kids. They will not do it intuitively. Second thing is respect. Do you know what? We don't actually have respect naturally either. You know why? Because we are selfish by nature. The scripture says that the heart of the man's imagination is evil from his youth. All we care about is ourselves. And here's the question I like to ask on this. Everybody enjoys their kids. The bigger question is, does anybody else enjoy them? Right? And that's an important question to ask because people go, oh, my kids are so cute and so lovely. No, they're terrible. They're rotten little selfish brats is what they really are. Nobody else enjoys them. They lack respect. And the 10 Commandments, take a stab at it. Every single one of the 10 Commandments was about respect. Honor God, honor your mother and father, don't kill your neighbor, don't take his wife, don't steal from him. Those are all things about respecting other people. And we will not learn it intuitively, or won't come intuitively. We're going to have to teach our kids respect. So, we worked really hard at this because I thought, I remember hearing that quote about, does anyone else like your kids or enjoy your kids? And I thought, I don't want to have those kids that nobody else enjoys. I'm going to raise these kids up with some level of respect if it kills me and them. Right? So we worked really, really hard at this. And this is the honest to God truth. It's going to sound like bragging, but it's true. When we used to take them to a restaurant, we always talked to them about it before we went. And we told them that it wasn't a privilege, or it was a privilege for them to go to, it wasn't a right. It was a privilege. It was something that they were doing that was something special, and they had to deserve the privilege to go out for dinner. And that meant if we were going out for pizza, which they love to do, or out for tacos, which they love to do, then they were going to behave while we were there if they wanted to ever go again. And we just drilled this into them. And they love going out for pizza so much. And you've all been in restaurants where there's these kids throwing drinks and hamburgers and yelling, I didn't want that, I want French fries. And they're screaming and yelling. You want to go slap the parents, right? Not the kids. Because the parents are the problem. And this is the honest to God truth. We used to take our kids to restaurants and people would come up to us and say, we have never seen such well-behaved kids. And on 2 occasions, people gave our kids money. I'm not joking. People came and opened their wallets and gave our kids money. And our kids looked at this and said, why are strangers giving us money? I said, because everybody likes to be respected. And they're honoring you for not being stinking rotten brats. That's what they're doing. Learn, grasshopper, learn. So the first thing is honesty. The second thing is respect. And the third thing is gratitude. Again, I'm going to say it, it's not something that comes naturally. You have to teach kids. Remember when we were growing up, those of you my age, our parents used to say, what are the magic words? Yeah. What were they? Please and thank you were the magic words. You're doing pretty well. You all know them. You know what you hear when you ask kids today, what's the magic words? Abracadabra. They don't know what the magic words are. They don't even know what you're talking about. And you know, when we hosted birthday parties, how many of you have ever hosted a birthday party for a little kid? How many of you have ever done that? Isn't that the worst? It's just the worst. Such a painful experience, but we do it because we love our kids. Anyway, we used to actually take odds, me and Kathy, about which kids were going to say thank you when they left. And we actually took note of it. But it was really easy to guess. You know why? Because we knew their parents. And you could tell from the parents whether these kids were kids who had been brought up in an environment of gratitude. And if you have parents that don't know how to be grateful and don't know how to say please and thank you and don't know how to appreciate things in their life, you can be rest assured the kids won't be any better. This is an important principle. So I got to tell you this crazy story. So my son asked me one day, this was a few years back, my son asked me one day if he could bring a bunch of his buddies down to the lake some weekend. We weren't there, use the cabin, use the boats, do all that stuff. So we said, sure, you can take them down, just don't leave the place a mess. You know the rules. We have rules in our place. So off they went, they did well, they didn't trash the place. There was about 8 or 10 guys for the weekend. And so anyway, that was fine. And about 6 months later, we saw one of these young men. He was about 25 years old at the time. And we saw one of these young men, and he came up to us, and he said, Mr. and Mrs. Hughes, I just wanted to thank you for having me down to your cottage that weekend. Now, we're looking at each other. We don't remember having him down to the cottage, right? And then we're a little bit perplexed, and we said, when was that? When? Last summer. Your son took us all down to the cottage, and I saw you there, and I ran over because I wanted to thank you for having us down to the cottage. And so I needed to ask him a question. I said, son, do you know either of my 2 daughters? And he says, yes, I know them both. I said, because I give you permission to marry either one of them. This is a true story. Unfortunately, they married other guys. But I'm so close. Look, I did my part. And so when we look at our world, the influences that our kids are getting are really beyond belief, aren't they? I mean, we have to counter the influence. Last week I told you that the average mother is now 14 hours with her kids every week. The average father, 7 hours a week with their kids. Do you want to see how much time they're spending online? You want to see? Screen time, here's the numbers. These are the latest numbers. Check these out. So the tweens, 8 to 12-year-olds, are spending, this isn't a week. This is per day. And it goes up every single year. Look at those, every couple of years it jumps up. They're already spending 5.5 hours a day on screen time. And the teens, the 13 to 18-year-olds, they're spending 8.5 hours every single day on screen time. So that's TV, that's their phone, that's internet. I know some of that stuff is, presumably maybe doing their homework or whatever, I don't know. But it's still a lot of hours. That's a full-time job. Being online, 8.5 hours. Most of you don't work 8.5 hours. They have to work very hard to be influenced by their culture. So what's that going to look like? The stuff they're being bombarded with, they're exposed to, I just want you to realize this, they're exposed to almost 10 times the amount or the time of the world as they're exposed to you. The greatest influence they have in their life is no longer you as a parent. And the stuff they are being exposed to, my goodness, it's frightening. See, I think about when I was growing up and I was watching TV, I had a dark side. Let me tell you about some of the dark stuff I was watching on TV. I was watching shows with scantily clad women. I was watching shows about witchcraft, shows about sorcery. Do you want to see them? Yeah, the scantily clad women, Gilligan's Island, witchcraft, Bewitched, sorcery, I Dream of Jeannie. These are all pretty light-duty shows. You know that. You know I'm kidding. That's not what kids are exposed to today. The stuff that they are being exposed to today should make you shudder. Do you remember you remember you could never hear the F word on television? Do you remember that? It wasn't that long ago. It wasn't allowed on television. And they've actually opened the floodgates, and they've said you can use it as much as you want, as long as you put a rating on there that it's not PG, as long as you put it that it's a mature audience. You can use the F word as much as you want on television. And so they're not just putting it in here and there. There is programming where the F word is every second or third word all the way through. And they claim that it's authenticity and they're just reflecting the culture. And I'm looking at this, and sometimes we were watching something. I look at Kathy and I said, I can't watch that. I don't believe that's how our culture sounds. I know enough people in enough different industries, and I associate with enough non-Christians. That is not how the world talks. They're not that disgusting and profane and blasphemous. I don't believe it. And yet, you know, the Emmys came out, and in the Emmy Awards, there was 8 nominations for Best Comedy. We're not talking crime stuff. Comedy, 7 of the 8 had inclusions of F words in their dialogue all the time. 7 out of the 8 best comedies. I mean, so something's going on in our world. Like we are in such big trouble with what's going on. And the floodgates have been opened. And this is what our young people are being exposed to. So let me just ask you a question. I mean, what is the message that our kids get when they see that marijuana and recreational drugs is legalized? What is the message in that? The message in that is that these things are not harmful, and that it's a good way to anesthetize yourself from dealing with the pains and struggles of life. You just need to dull your brain. And apparently we've learned nothing from Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, that it is a government ploy to have you high and stupid so they can control you. That's my belief on that. What is the message that we get from legalized abortion in our culture? What's the message young people get? That you don't have to take responsibility for your sexual activity. And if by chance you produce a child, you're free to kill it if it inconveniences you in any way. What is the message that young people are getting today on gender? Yeah, I'm going to go where angels fear to tread. And the message they're getting today is, oh, by the way, either God or nature, depending on who you believe in, somehow made a mistake at birth, and you may or may not be what you think you are, and so you need to go and explore it. And I look at that and I think, really? This is where our culture is going? I did not see this coming in a million years. I knew what path we were heading down, and I knew, you know, what was happening with the family, and I knew what was happening with marriage. But this thing was a mystery to me. And I thought, we can't figure out who we are as a gender? Now I'm gonna point something out to you that some of you are gonna wonder why I'm talking about in church, but I'm gonna anyway. How many of you know who Bill Maher is? He used to be the politically incorrect guy. He's now Real Time with Bill Maher. He's on HBO. He can't be on a regular station because he's foul. But I'll tell you something else about him. He's a radical left liberal. Having said that, he will call out anybody if he thinks it's absurd. Understand, give you some context, he is fully supportive of gay rights and trans people and gay people and LGBTQ. But he did a video, and I showed it to our staff because I thought, you need to see this. You need to see what people are realizing that we've gone too far. And it was called Along for the Pride. Here's the first clip of this. And what he was, the first picture of it, and what he was looking at was the stats that Americans were identifying as LGBTQ more than ever before. And specifically, that the people who are identifying as gay is doubling every single generation. And here's the graph he put up. So in the builder generation, the silent generation, 0.8%. Baby boomers, 2.6%, doubling every generation. Gen X, 4%. Millennials, 10.5%. Gen Z, 20.8% of them are declaring that they're LGBTQ. And then he said this. He said, if you take this to its logical conclusion, we will all be gay by the year 2054. And this is a guy who actually believes in this stuff. So understand what he's saying. He's saying, you know, it's not transphobic or homophobic to ask the question, what's up with this? Are all the babies being born in the wrong bodies? And I think it's a great question to ask. You may or may not know this, but that in Canada, a child as young as 10 years old can request puberty blocking drugs without the consent of their parent. There's something really wrong with this picture. We won't let them drink, we won't let them smoke, we won't let them drive a car, we won't let them vote, we won't let them do all of these things because they're too young and too stupid, but we will let them irrevocably alter their genetic structure with drugs artificially at the age of 10 when we have no idea whatsoever what the long-term consequences of this is going to be. This is absolutely absurd. How is that not child abuse? That's what I want to know as a parent. That's what I want to know. And so Bill Maher asked this question. He said, you know what? When I grew up, if people asked you, what do you want to be when you grow up? They meant your profession, not this. And then he says this. He says, I wanted to be a pirate. I'm so grateful I wasn't booked for eye removal and leg amputation surgery for a bad leg. You following this, right? This is what these young people are being exposed to. There's something really tragically broken in our culture, people. And we have got to be training our kids. We've got to, who are they going to hear this from? Nobody's going to give them the alternative message on this. And even Sweden and Finland, who are amongst the most liberal countries in the world, actually have banned giving puberty-blocking drugs to kids because the research has come out that it irreparably damages their physiology and their bone structure and their bone density. What are we doing? The world has gone stark, raving mad. And if the parents don't stand up and be parents, and if we don't try to alter, or what I mean by is counteract the influences of our world, our kids are just going to march down that merry path, and it's not a merry ending. So the first thing is paideia, training. The second thing, and I'll just crash land on this, is the word admonition. And the word admonition is the word noithusia, and it means to put one in his right mind. And what it means is to convince someone what the right thing to do is. That's what it literally means. And it's not about, when we think about admonition and we think about discipline, and what it means is it means to warn or correct somebody and to give them the knowledge to make the right decision. And so here's what you don't do. You've seen this happen. You've seen this kind of parenting. It's the worst kind of parenting. The parent kind of lets it go. They get all frustrated, they get angry, and they snap. And then they start yelling at their kid, or worse yet, they start hitting the kid, and they're disciplining the kid out of anger on their own frustration. Do not provoke your children to wrath, but admonish them in the Lord, Paul says. And see, that's the worst kind of parenting, because that kid doesn't know what he's done wrong. How are you correcting him? How are you putting him straight? Because you snapped in this emotional tirade because you got all frustrated. And so what he means is this. He means you have to give them prior knowledge so that they know what the consequences are in advance. Fascinating. We talked about Absalom last week. I just want to show you this verse. Throw it up real quick. This is what it says. It says, now his father, King David, had never disciplined him at any time. Absalom rebelled against him. He never disciplined him at any time. He never told him what the right thing to do was. He never corrected his mind, not once. And so Jesus, when you watch him and how he functions, what does he do? He goes and he heals the man at the pool of Bethesda, and who remembers what he said to him? Go your way. What did he say? Go your way and sin no more what? What? Lest a worse sin come upon you. Go your way and sin no more, lest a worse sin come upon you. What did Jesus do? He admonished him. He healed him. He blessed him. He took care of him. But he said, this is what I want you to do. Now, when you leave this place, you can't go back to living the way you were before. Because if you do that, a worse thing will come upon you. Do you see what he did? He had admonished him and he warned him based on prior knowledge that if you do this, this is what will happen. And that's how you parent. You don't react after the fact when they don't know that they have misbehaved. You make sure they know what the right thing is to do. And I'll just close with a simple illustration, again, bragging about my kids. Kathy used to take our kids to McDonald's about once a week when she was a stay-at-home mom, because they had the playland where you go play in the balls and the slides and that. But this is what she told them. She says, now we're going to go, And when it's time to leave, and I say it's time to leave, we will pack up and you will quietly leave with me without making any fuss. And if you cry, and if you whine, and if you make a scene, we will not be going back again. And she got them to agree to that. They're just little. They're just little to this, like this. And she never had a single time where the kids cried when they had to leave. You've seen kids leaving McDonald's or leaving one of those places. I want to stay, I don't want to go, running away. That's because mom or dad didn't admonish them in advance and put them in their right mind. Now we know that the parent's the one not in the right mind, we know that, but you get the picture. And so we have this great responsibility, people. I know I threw a lot of stuff at you tonight and I didn't even get through it all. But we have this great responsibility to raise up the next generation in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. And you know what, folks? There has never been a more critical time in history than now for parents to stand up and be parents. Let's stand together.